Oh, here, by the way, let's just do this because I know I know now that I know that Barnes is the lawyer on file, and now that I know that Barnes doesn't want this to go silently into the night and wants people to understand what is at issue in this case of the government fining an Amish farmer, an Amish farmer over $300,000, looking to put him in jail for not paying the amount. I just want to read an article so that people understand what's going on. This is in FSN, Food Safety News, people. Pay up or go to jail for contempt is worst case scenario for Amos Miller on September 26th. It's been pushed off now to October. This is how the story is being described by the other side. Since it began almost 6 years ago, the definitive court hearing always seems to be about 1 month away. The United States versus Miller's Organic Farm and Amos Miller's next such hearing is set for September 26th, postponed to October 31st. I think is a new date now. At this one, Amos Miller of Bird in Hand, Pennsylvania, must have his $305,000 fine paid up or he risks going to jail. Federal Judge Edward G. Smith has called this hearing, quote, after considering the plaintiff's motion for an order to show cause Y1. Order to show cause is basically if you're going to try to hold someone in contempt for not complying with a court order. At least under Quebec law, it might mean something a little different here, but I don't think it does. Order to show cause for why, one, Amos Miller should not be incarcerated as a further civil contempt sanction, and two, Rebecca R. Miller should not be added as a defendant to this action. We discussed this last night. The state set aside all principles of fundamental justice after judgment, whether or not you think it was fair, after fine, just want to throw in another defendant. Just add another defendant to the suit. And it looks like the plaintiff, wants to tell the court, just add another defendant. Typically in law, at least in Quebec, if ever you add another defendant to a lawsuit, typically the process starts over from scratch because you're adding another defendant who has all of their legal rights intact. And so even if you get a judgment by default, if you serve a lawsuit and then a year in, you realize, oh, there's another defendant I have to add. You got to add the defendant. You got to serve the lawsuit again. You got to give the new defendant the right to appear, to defend, to be deposed and to depose, to file a defense. And if you've gotten a judgment, you can't just add a defendant willy-nilly to an already gotten judgment because they have rights. And you risk effectively losing your judgment, at the very least against an additional party, because they got to come in and say, yeah, dude, I'm not coming in fait accompli and having to pay $300,000. I might have defenses. I don't know exactly the procedural posture here, but from what we discussed last night, they just willy-nilly, arbitrarily, at this point in time, in addition to what they've done to Amos Miller, the Amish farmer, and the $305,000 fines they've imposed, they just want to add his wife as a defendant. Yeah. Rebecca Miller is the wife of Amos Miller, co-owner of Miller's Organic Farm. Smith has ordered all parties in the case to appear in his Eastern Pennsylvania Federal District Court. At the hearing, the court will entertain a, quote, more complete judgment order, end quote, to bring about compliance with the previous but still unpaid order demanding Miller pay $305,000, incarcerating Miller for his continuing civil contempt until defendants, quote, make such payments. Remember when it says that's just a fine? You don't go to jail for a fine. It's just a COVID fine. You don't go to jail for a COVID fine. You just pay it. And if you don't, they can put you in jail for contempt. Is also under the judge's activity consideration. In August, Miller successfully brought national attention to his cause, primarily by getting his version of the story told by Tucker Carlson on Fox News. This is one of those stories that is hard to believe, said the Fox News host. They're going after an Amish farmer. The report was about the federal government making an example of an organic Amish farmer. But as everyone who followed it for years, it isn't that simple. Miller owns farms in multiple states and distributes food nationally throughout a club system. Club system sounds like a voluntary subscription service. So it's not like you're walking into a grocery store and just finding random products on the shelf. You know what the organic farm that you have joined as a club is about. His raw milk, listen to this. This is what I said. His raw milk was linked to a death in 2014. His raw milk was linked to a death in 2014. I'd love to know how that link was drawn. And the USDA has worked since 2016 to bring Miller into compliance with food safety regulations, including those for slaughtering animals then sold for human consumption. Miller has a knack for promising to comply and resigning from any commitment after changing attorneys several times. He's engaged a, quote, sovereign citizen organization in his defense that also muddies the water. For the September 26th hearing, he says, quote, defendants created GoFundMe accounts specifically to raise money to pay the civil contempt sanction. Defendants have raised $20,000 and anticipate raising more in the coming weeks. I put out the GoFundMe page yesterday, but I'll put it out now again. Defendants now give written notice that they intend to present evidence to affirmatively establish their inability to pay $305,065.72 in civil sanctions. However, defendants acknowledge that they are raising money daily through a newly created GoFundMe account, which should provide more resources by September 26th. Miller plans to testify at the hearing. Quote, he will testify that it is against his Amish beliefs to request money from individuals without having earned it through work, but he reluctantly consented to the creation of a GoFundMe account to GoFundMe accounts to raise funds needed to keep his farm operating, and at least one fund created to raise money to pay civil contempt sanction. Miller witnesses are also expected to testify that funds cannot be released to pay a federal contempt fine because of the terms of service under which they were created. Meanwhile, the Third Circuit returned Miller's recent request for a review of Smith's ruling, dismissing it for lack of appellate jurisdiction. There is no basis for jurisdiction over appellant's appeal, which seeks to appeal, quote, comments by the district court, but fails to identify any specific order being appealed. Well, I presume that now that Barnes is in, we'll take a different angle. GoFundMe, Amos, Miller. Not GoFundMe. I'm not looking for GoFundMe. I'm looking for Give, Send, Go. Here we go. This is it. And I'll post it in the chat. So I mean, we talked about it at length yesterday. I'm inclined to understand exactly what Barnes is so worked up about in this case. This article tries to depict what Amos Miller is doing as, you know, an interstate enterprise. You know, he ships his products across the country. It's a network, a very complex network. And they refer to it as a club. If it's a club and people want the product that Amos Miller is producing the way he's producing it for whatever the reason, I understand what Barnes thinks is at issue in this case, because it is, in fact, at issue in this case.